The night before my wedding, I stood in the cold room, the air thick with apples and oak. I stared at the scorched photo in my hand, my father, smiling next to a man who supposedly died in an accident 25 years ago. A text from my groom buzzed. I know who he is, and I know why he died. At midnight, as the wind howled through the orchard, a trapdoor creaked open beneath the storeroom floor. The smell of distilled botanicals rose like a confession. My name is Delaney Brooks. For 12 years, I have been the head of logistics and quality control at Brookhaven Estate Cider and Vine. This land isn't just a place. It's a complex system of soil, water, yeast, and people, and I am the one who ensures all parts move in harmony. The Willamette Valley is unforgiving. You respect the process, or you lose the product. My world is one of specific gravity readings, pallet stacking patterns, and the precise, clean scent of stainless steel tanks on a Tuesday morning. I live by the data. Data doesn't lie. I was in the middle of sensory analysis for our flagship Autumn Reserve, comparing the phenolic notes of batch 7 against the control sample. When the door to the lab hissed open, I didn't look up, just swirled the glass. The astringency is spiking post-filtration. Maria, check the diatomaceous earth supplier again. I want a certificate of analysis on my desk by 3. Maria isn't here. The voice was my father's. I lowered the glass. Gregory Brooks stood in the doorway, his expensive blazer looking ridiculous against the backdrop of my fermentation charts. He never came to the lab. He was the face of Brookhaven, the man who shook hands and charmed distributors. Behind him, my mother, Marjorie, stood with her arms crossed, her presence sucking the warmth from the room. "We need to talk," Gregory said. He wasn't smiling. I capped the sample bottle. "I'm in the middle of a bottling run. Dad, we're 30,000 units short for the Portland order." "The Portland order doesn't matter," Marjorie said, stepping forward. Her voice was flat, like a bad harvest. My father threw a sheaf of papers onto my stainless steel workbench, scattering my hydrometers. They were printed on neon pink paper. Foreclosure warnings, asset seizure notices. $62 million, Delaney, Gregory said, his voice thick. "The banks are calling in the operating loans. All of them." I stared at the number. It was an abstraction. Impossible. "That can't be. Our projections were solid for Q3. I ran them myself." "Projections," Marjorie scoffed, as if the word was filth. "Your projections didn't account for your father's outstanding markers, or the failed futures trades, or the fact that our lenders have finally decided we are no longer a good bet." I looked at the top page. The deadline stamp was bright red. We had 19 days. 19 days until Brookhaven, the legacy my great-grandfather built, was carved up and sold for parts. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my mind already calculating liquidation strategies, potential bridge loans, which assets were unencumbered. "We aren't doing anything," Gregory said, unable to meet my eyes. He was studying a pressure gauge on Tank 4. Marjorie stepped directly into my line of sight. You can be useful this time, Delaney." And there it was. Not a request, not a plea, a deployment. They had a plan. I wasn't to be a partner in solving the problem. I was the asset being leveraged. "There is a man," Marjorie continued, "Lucas Hale. His family runs one of the largest private equity firms in the Pacific Northwest. They have agreed to absorb the entire debt." I waited. The silence in the lab was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the glycol chillers. "In exchange for what?" I whispered. "A merger," Gregory said, finally looking at me. "A permanent one. You'll marry him." The proposal was so grotesque, so medieval, that I almost laughed. "You're selling me." "We are saving this estate," Gregory roared, his face turning purple. "We are saving the jobs of every person who works for you." "The wedding is set for the end of the month," Marjorie said, checking her watch, as if she were scheduling a pesticide delivery. "It will be here, on the Apple Hill. We've already booked the caterers. It will be an event, a message to the entire valley that Brookhaven is stronger than ever." An illusion of wealth, a Potemkin village wedding, staged on the very land that was being ripped out from under us. I thought of the harvest crew, how their last paychecks had been delayed 2 days. My mother was planning a party while the people who made this place run were wondering if they could make rent. I looked past my parents, through the lab window, to the bottling line. I saw Rosa and her crew, their hands a blur as they packed cases. I saw Miguel, our orchard manager, who had just had his 3rd child. 43 households, 43 families who depended on the checks I signed. My professional ethics, the core of my identity, were now hopelessly chained to this obscene personal demand. This wasn't just about my parents' pride, it was about Rosa and Miguel and their children. Fine, I said. The word felt like swallowing glass. I'll meet him. Lucas Hale arrived the next day. He didn't come to the Grand Estate House. He came to the production facility, finding me during a filtration run. He was tall, dressed in a way that signaled wealth without being loud about it, but it was his eyes that held me. They were calm, deeply analytical, and missed nothing. As my father blustered through a greeting, Lucas's gaze swept the facility, noting the age of the tank welts, the brand of the bottling line, the efficiency of the case-packing crew. He wasn't a suitor. He was an auditor. He was compiling a dossier on his new acquisition. He said very little. His handshake was firm and dry. He listened to my father's desperate, rambling speech about Brookhaven's untapped potential with a neutral expression. Later, the lawyers met, not me and Lucas, but his lawyers, and our panicked, in-house counsel. The contract was delivered to my room that evening. It was not a prenuptial agreement. It was a bill of sale. I read the clauses, my logistics mind dissecting the language. The legalese was airtight. The instant the marriage certificate was signed, the $62 million debt would be consolidated and transferred to a holding company controlled by Hale Equity. My signature was the collateral. I pushed the contract aside and unlocked my personal laptop. I opened the file I kept hidden, password protected, and buried 3 folders deep. It was my project, the one I worked on during my own time. A plan for a line of botanical bitters, crafted from the apple pomace, the waste from our cider pressings, combined with wild botanicals I'd cataloged from the undeveloped acreage of the estate. It was innovative, sustainable, and potentially wildly profitable. I had pitched it to my mother 6 months ago. She had dismissed it as a romantic waste of byproducts. Focus on volume, Delaney, she'd said. Not your garden hobbies, staring at the formulas, the market research, and the branding mock-ups. I felt a surge of cold fury. This was my value, the part of me they refused to see. A rap on my door made me slam the laptop shut. It was my sister, Sloane. She burst in, a phone in her hand, already recording. There she is, the blushing bride. Oh my God. Delaney, you have to see the swatches for the bridesmaid dresses. Mother is sparing no expense. Sloane was the bright, shining face of Brookhaven's social media. She drifted through the orchards in flowing dresses, posting filtered stories about the magic of the harvest, while I balanced the spreadsheets that kept that magic from collapsing. She shoved her phone in my face, the camera light blinding. Smile! All our followers are dying to see you. They can't believe my big sister, the workaholic, snagged the valley's most eligible bachelor. How did you even meet? I pushed the phone away. Get out, Sloane. God, you're always so stressed, she pouted, turning the camera back to herself. Anyway, I'm going to try on my dress. It's vintage lace. You're going to look amazing. We all are. She breezed out, leaving a trail of expensive perfume. I looked at the contract on my desk, then at the foreclosure notices, then at the photo of Rosa's new baby pinned to my corkboard. I would do it, but I would do it on my terms. I would treat this as the ultimate logistical challenge, a transaction. I would save the jobs. I would save the 43 families. I would compartmentalize this, wall it off, lock down my emotions the same way I would isolate a compromised batch of cider before it could spoil the entire vintage. This was not a marriage. It was a hostile merger, and I was the price of admission. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of fake smiles and frantic, hollow preparations. I walked through it all like a ghost, my mind elsewhere, running calculations. Then, the night before the ceremony, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew it was him. Lucas. It was the first time he had ever contacted me directly. The message was short. 6 words that tilted my world off its axis. I need to talk about Edmund Vale. The name meant nothing to me. I typed back, "Who?" But there was no reply. An hour later, I was in the main office, looking for the quarterly tax filings, when I brushed against a stack of old binders. A single, faded manila folder, tucked between Irrigation Budgets 1998 and Harvest Yields 1999, slipped and fell to the floor. It wasn't a tax file. A single photograph slid out, landing face up on the hardwood. It was old, the edges curled, a dark scorch mark blackening one corner. It showed a younger Gregory, my father, beaming, his arms slung around another man. They were standing in front of a brand new tractor, a model I didn't recognize. It was painted a distinctive green. Emblazoned on the side was the logo, Vale 90. This was the man from the hook I'd seen in the cold room, the man who had been dead for 25 years. And now, my groom, the man I was being forced to marry to save my family, knew his name. The Apple Hill was where my great-grandfather had planted his first sapling. It was the highest point on the estate, overlooking the neat rows of trees that descended into the valley. Now, it was covered in white roses, peonies, and hundreds of softly glowing lanterns. Marjorie's illusion of wealth was complete. It was breathtaking. It was a lie. From a distance, as I stood at the altar, the guests must have thought I was the calmest bride in Oregon. They probably mistook my stillness for poise, my rigid posture for elegance. They were wrong. I was not calm. I was petrified. I had ceased to be a person and had become a component in a transaction. My mind, trained for logistics, had walled off all emotion. I was simply observing the final stages of a critical shipment, myself. The vows were a blur of contractual language I barely heard. When the officiant prompted me, I said, "I do." The words were dry, tasteless. It was the verbal equivalent of signing a bill of lading. I felt the precise, cold click of the deal closing. The $62 million debt was settled. My family's legacy, built on a foundation I was only just beginning to question, was secure. Lucas Hale, my husband, kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion, or even affection. It was a brief, dry press of lips, a public seal on our agreement. It was as cold as the steel of the fermentation tanks I managed every day. The reception began. The tent glowed golden against the twilight. My father, Gregory, was transformed. The desperate, purple-faced man who had thrown foreclosure notices at me was gone, replaced by the charming patriarch of Brookhaven. He was circulating, drink in hand, his laughter booming across the lawn. He was playing the role of the proud father, but I watched his eyes. They were not on me. They were fixed on the investors he was cornering. The men in expensive suits he was now free to lie to about our stable and bright future. My mother, Marjorie, was the field marshal. She glided between tables, a fixed, reptilian smile on her face. She was not celebrating. She was confirming the new hierarchy. I saw her personally seating a group of men I had never seen before. They were older, with the bland, merciless faces of private bankers. They were the ones who had held the knives to our throats, and now they were the guests of honor at the VIP table, drinking our best vintage. Lucas was a strange presence. After the ceremony, his obligation to perform seemed to have ended. He made a toast, if one could call it that. He raised his glass, his voice clear and emotionless, cutting through the manufactured joy. To new partnerships, not to love, not to me, to partnerships. It was the only honest statement made all evening. He spent the rest of the time moving. He did not mingle. He observed. He walked the perimeter of the tent, his eyes scanning the layout. He stood by the terrace, looking down at the angle of the slope toward the main house. He noted the placement of the service roads. He looked less like a groom and more like a man casing a property, like he was conducting a site survey for a hostile takeover, which, I supposed, he was. My sister, Sloane, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant, was in her element. She orbited Lucas, her laughter high and brittle. She was the vision of the perfect vineyard princess, and she seemed determined to charm her new, wealthy brother-in-law. I watched her from across the lawn. She touched his arm as she spoke. Once, a light, casual tap. Then again, her fingers lingering on the sleeve of his tuxedo. It was an ambiguous, vaguely flirtatious gesture, a subtle reminder that she was the beautiful one, the fun one. Lucas, to his credit, seemed utterly unaffected. His face remained impassive as he nodded, his gaze already shifting past her, toward the distant silhouette of the warehouses. I did not drink the champagne. I did not touch the wine. I held a glass of cold water, keeping my head perfectly, painfully clear. I was the person responsible for this delivery. I was signing the manifest for my own life, and I would not be impaired when I reviewed the terms. As the band started to play a generic, forgettable song, Lucas approached me. It was the first time we had been near each other without an audience since the ceremony. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a request. We moved away from the golden canopy of the tent, toward the deep shadows cast by the ancient oak trees at the edge of the lawn. The music faded, replaced by the sound of crickets and the cold night air. He stopped where the light could not reach us. He did not take my hand. He did not look at me with any warmth. He reached into his pocket and pressed a small, folded piece of paper into my palm. His fingers were cold and dry. "What is this?" I asked. "Read it." I angled the paper to catch the distant light from the party. The handwriting was sharp and precise. 60% of Brookhaven did not originally belong to the Brooks family. I read the sentence 3 times. The words refused to make sense. "This is wrong. I've seen the incorporation papers. My father has been the majority shareholder for over 2 decades. For as long as you have been aware," Lucas corrected me, his voice low. "Your family's official history has been heavily edited. Look closer." He turned and walked back toward the light, leaving me standing alone in the darkness, the paper feeling like ice in my hand. 60%. It was an impossible number. It meant that for my entire life, my family's claim to this land, the very legacy I had just been sold to protect, was a fabrication. The $62 million debt was a symptom of a much older, deeper rot. I found him an hour later. The party was thinning. I had spent the hour running calculations, my mind flashing through every file, every budget, every expansion plan I had ever seen. All of them were based on the assumption that we owned this land. He was in the cooperage, the old barrel-making shed we now used for storing empty casks. The air smelled of old wine and damp wood. "You can't just show me that note and walk away," I said, my voice quiet but shaking with a cold rage. "Explain it. Who is Edmund Vale?" Lucas did not turn to face me. He was running his hand along the weathered staves of a massive, ancient fermentation cask, one of the original vessels my great-grandfather had supposedly shipped from Europe. It had sat in this shed as a decorative piece for my entire life. "I'm not explaining," he said. "I'm showing you." From the inner pocket of his tuxedo, he pulled a small, powerful aluminum flashlight. It was an analyst's tool, not a groom's accessory. He clicked it on, the bright white beam cutting through the dusty air. He aimed the light not at me, but at the base of the giant cask, illuminating a spot near the floor that was thick with cobwebs and grime. "Look," he commanded. I knelt, my ridiculously expensive wedding dress pooling in the dirt. I wiped away the grime with my hand. Beneath it, burned deep into the wood, was a maker's mark. It was not the stylized B of Brookhaven. It was an ornate, stylized V, and intertwined with its curves, almost hidden unless you were looking for it, was a smaller E. "E," I whispered, the name from his text, The man from the photograph. Edmund Vale. He wasn't just a farmer with a new tractor, I said, looking up at Lucas. He was the company, Lucas replied. We waited until the house was silent. It was well past midnight. The party was over. The lanterns were out. My parents, I assumed, were sleeping the sound, secure sleep of the newly solvent. I had changed out of my dress and into jeans and a heavy work coat. I felt like myself again. I found Lucas waiting by the back door of the main house. He, too, had changed, into dark work clothes. He simply nodded, and we began to walk. We crunched over the gravel, our footsteps loud in the silence. We bypassed the new, gleaming lab and the main bottling facility. We headed for the oldest building on the property, warehouse number 3. It was a cavernous, neglected building. We used it for overflow, for storing things that had no other home. Pallets of discontinued bottle designs, broken harvesting bins, aging bags of filtration media. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth, rust, and mouse droppings. Why are we here? I asked, pulling my coat tighter. Lucas didn't answer. He walked with purpose, his flashlight beam steady, navigating the maze of forgotten inventory. He went to the far back corner, a space piled high with rotting wooden apple crates from a harvest 30 years ago. Help me, he said. We began moving the crates. They were heavy, crumbling in our hands. Beneath the last one, I saw it. I had walked over this spot 100 times and never seen it. A heavy recessed iron ring, set flush into the concrete floor. Lucas gripped the ring and pulled. Nothing. He repositioned his feet, braced himself, and heaved. With a deep, scraping groan of stone on stone and the shriek of rusted hinges, a square section of the floor lifted. It was a trapdoor, a cellar door, hidden in plain sight. A blast of cold, dry air hit my face. It carried a scent that was utterly alien to this building, yet instantly familiar from the night before. It was not the sweet, yeasty smell of cider. It was complex, sharp, and earthy. The smell of distilled herbs, angelica, gentian, wormwood. Lucas aimed his flashlight beam into the black void. A set of narrow, steep wooden stairs descended into the earth. After you, he said. You're the lady of the estate now. This is your inheritance. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a trapped bird. This was my warehouse, my inventory, my domain, and this secret had been festering beneath my feet. I took the first step. The wood was old but solid. I descended into the cold, the smell of botanicals and old paper growing stronger with every step. The stairs ended on a floor of packed earth. Lucas followed me down and found a light switch on the stone wall. He flicked it. A string of bare bulbs sputtered to life, illuminating a low-ceilinged, stone-walled room. I gasped. It was a laboratory, an alchemist's workshop. In the corner sat a small, beautiful copper pot still, its surface green with verdigris. The walls were lined with rough-hewn wooden shelves, and on them sat hundreds of glass jars, filled with dried roots, barks, flowers, and spices. Each was labeled in elegant, faded fountain pen script: Quassia amara, Cinchona officinalis, Artemisia absinthium. Bunches of dried herbs hung from the low rafters, rustling in the draft from the open door above us. In the center of the room, on a heavy oak table, sat a thick, leather-bound ledger, a recipe book. My hands were shaking as I reached out and opened the cover. The first page was not a list of ingredients. It was a philosophy, written in that same confident script, and below it, the recipes began: complex, multi-stage macerations, distillation proofs, infusion timings. It was a lifetime of work. My eyes scanned the page, and I saw a name, signed at the bottom as if to consecrate the work: Edmund Vale. And beneath his name, a single sentence: the essence of this land isn't just wine, it's flavor and memory. I looked at Lucas, his face impassive in the dim, dusty light. My project, I whispered, my mind reeling back to my password-protected file on my laptop. The botanical bitters I thought were my own innovation. He was already doing it. He was doing all of this. He was doing it first, Lucas said, his voice hard as the stone around us. And this, he swept his hand across the room, at the still, the herbs, the legacy. This was his, all of it. We spent the rest of our wedding night in the cold, stone-walled cellar. The music and laughter from the party above faded until they were nothing but a distant, muffled lie. My world, which I had always defined by clear metrics and verifiable data, had been hollowed out. I was standing in the true heart of Brookhaven, a place of genius and secrets, hidden beneath the rotting floorboards of my family's greed. Lucas Hale, my husband, sat on a dusty crate and watched me. He was no longer an auditor, no longer the detached businessman. His calm was gone, replaced by a cold, focused intensity. I saw the ghost of a lineage in his features, the echo of the man in the faded photograph. I am a logistician. I manage chaos for a living. I took the overwhelming emotional vertigo of the moment and I compartmentalized it. Shock is an indulgence. Data is a tool. We start from the beginning, I said, my voice sounding strange and loud in the small room. I ran my hands over the leather-bound ledgers. We treat this like a failed audit. We establish a timeline. I began arranging the books in chronological order on the workbench. Edmund Vale's precision was breathtaking. He wasn't just a cider maker. He was a scientist, a botanist. His logs from 1997 and 1998 detailed soil composition, rainfall, and bee migration patterns. He was meticulously planning a transition to full-scale regenerative agriculture, arguing that the synthetic pesticides used by neighboring farms were destroying the valley's long-term viability. He was 25 years ahead of his time. Then, I opened the ledger for 1999, the year of the accident, the year my father, Gregory, took sole control. I left Lucas in the cellar and went to my office in the main house. The house was dark. My parents were asleep. I moved silently, my bare feet on the cold hardwood floors. I retrieved my own production binders, the modern ones, filled with spreadsheets, quality assurance reports, and supplier invoices. I brought them down into the dust. I laid my recent charts next to Vale's handwritten logs. The story was immediate, brutal, and told in data. Here, I said, my finger tracing a line graph. This is our apple quality index. Brix, acidity, phenolic compounds. Look what happens in 1999, right after Vale's death. Lucas leaned in. The line on the graph plummeted. The quality collapsed, he said. They lost his expertise, I whispered, feeling a strange, vicarious grief. The soil health he'd been building must have failed without his methods. The trees went into shock. I then pointed to a spot 6 months later. And look here, the quality spikes, artificially high, way above the baseline. A rebound like this isn't natural. I opened my purchasing binder. This is why. I turned the page to the invoices from late 1999. Massive purchases, chemical fertilizers, synthetic pesticides, brands known for being cheap, fast, and devastating to the soil's microbiome. My father abandoned everything Vale was working toward. He forced the yield with chemicals. He was poisoning the land, Lucas said, his voice flat. He was, I agreed. But he was also covering his tracks. I pulled out a specific invoice, one stapled to a thin memo. This one, the pesticide compound is flagged. I read the letterhead. WTEB, the Willamette Valley Trust for Environmental Balance. They're warning that this chemical has been linked to groundwater contamination. I've never heard of WTEB, I said, scanning my memory of valley cooperatives. You wouldn't have, Lucas said. It's a shell, a ghost organization, funded by the same chemical producers, designed to look like oversight. It provides a paper trail of due diligence where none exists. My eyes fell to the bottom of the invoice, to the receiving signature. It wasn't my father's. It wasn't our foreman's. It was a hurried, illegible scrawl, signed at a time My logistics software showed the loading docks were closed. Someone accepted this delivery in the middle of the night. I stared at the forged signature, the fake warning, the timeline of death and chemical saturation. I looked at this stranger I had married. "You knew this," I said. "You knew all of it. Why? Why this elaborate, expensive merger just to get access? The $62 million? That's a rounding error for your family. This isn't business. This is personal." Lucas turned away from me, running his hand over the cool, greened copper of the pot still. He was silent for a full minute, and for the first time, his analytical mask fractured. Edmund Vale was my grandfather. The air left my lungs, the cellar, the jars, the scent of dried herbs. It all snapped into focus. "My mother was his daughter," Lucas continued, his voice low. "Elara, she was his only child. She left the valley, wanted no part of the farm. She saw what Gregory Brooks was, what he wanted. She begged her father to get out, to sell his share, but he was pathologically attached to this land. When he died, she knew it wasn't an accident. She tried to fight it. But my father, your father, had the lawyers, the money, and the power. He locked her out completely." He picked up a small, dried flower from a cracked porcelain dish. "She died 4 years ago, cancer, but before she did, she made me promise. Find out what he did. Find out and burn him with it. My mother's maiden name was Hale. I took it. It was the only way I could operate here without Gregory or Marjorie seeing the name Vale and slamming the door. When I heard they were leveraged to the breaking point. $62 million. It was the perfect excuse, a crisis that only I could solve. The price of entry was marrying his daughter, a price I was more than willing to pay." He looked at me, his eyes burning with a cold, inherited fire. "I didn't know which daughter. At first, I assumed it would be Sloane, the public face. When they offered you, the logistics expert, the one who actually knew the business, I knew it was a mistake on their part. They had just given me the keys to the inside." "The note you gave me," I said, my mind racing. 60%. "My grandfather owned the majority of this company," Lucas said. "This," he swept his arm. "This was his operation. Brookhaven was the brand name, but Vale was the asset, the land, the science. My father's name is the only one on the incorporation documents." "Now it is," Lucas said. He pulled a slim USB drive from his pocket. We climbed the stairs, the cold pre-dawn air hitting us as we exited the warehouse. We walked back to my office. The house was still, trapped in its lie. He plugged the drive into my laptop. The screen flared to life, illuminating our tired faces. He opened a file. It was a scan of a legal document. Transfer of majority shares. Brookhaven and Vale Enterprises. 60%. Signed over from the Edmund Vale Family Trust to Gregory Brooks. Effective immediately. "Look at the date," Lucas said. My blood ran cold. It was dated the day after the tractor accident. 24 hours. A grieving family's first act is not usually a fire sale of their primary asset. "The notary," I whispered, zooming in on the stamp. "Alicia Mendez. I knew that name. She was a legend in the county. She had a stroke, a bad one. She was in the hospital." I frantically typed her name into the county newspaper archives. An article from 1999 appeared. She was admitted to the hospital 3 days before this document was supposedly signed in her presence. This is a forgery. This is blatant. "It's the cornerstone of your family's legacy," Lucas said. He opened another file. "This is the original partnership insurance policy, $500,000, payable to the company in the event of a partner's death. Standard practice." He opened a second file, an addendum. This was filed 13 days before the Vale 90 went off the North Ridge. The policy value had been changed, tripled, $1.5 million, payable to the company, which, thanks to a forged notary stamp, Gregory now controlled outright. "He needed capital for the chemical pivot," I said, the ugly logic clicking into place. "Vale wouldn't provide it, so he manufactured it." I felt suffocated by the office. I had to get back to the cellar, I had to get back to the only place that felt real. I left Lucas and descended the stairs again. I needed to see Vale's words. I went to the desk, to the large bitters ledger. Tucked into the back cover, beneath a complex recipe for a smoke-infused tincture, was a folded piece of paper. It was a letter. The ink faded but clear, addressed to my dearest Ilara. My hands were shaking as I read my husband's grandmother's letter. He is blind to it. Ilara. Gregory wants the fast money, the chemicals. He doesn't see that he's poisoning the soil that feeds us. I told him this morning I would block the purchase. I told him I would use my 60% to expose him to the cooperative. He said, Ilara. He looked at me, not like a partner. He said he would not be stopped. He said if I get in his way, he will retaliate. He will burn it all down before he lets me save it. Be careful. I read the words aloud as Lucas came back down the stairs. I turned the page in the ledger, desperate to focus on anything else. My eyes landed on the recipe title. Formula 12, East Sector Smokehouse Blend. Smokehouse, I said. There is no smokehouse on the East Sector. It's just undeveloped acreage. I run inventory on this property every quarter. There is no smokehouse. There was, Lucas said. He pulled out his phone and brought up a file. A county satellite image, time-stamped 1998. He zoomed in on the East Sector. There, clear as day, was a small, square foundation, a building. He swiped to a new image, dated 2000. This is from the month after your father filed the East Orchard expansion plans. The foundation was gone. The land was bulldozed, scraped clean. The expansion itself, I knew, had never happened. It was just a line item in a budget, a cover for an excavation. I sat down hard on the cold stone steps, the letter in my hand. The sun was rising. It was the first morning of my marriage. I summarized the data, the only way I knew how. A staged murder, I said, my voice hollow. He tampers with the tractor, the Vale 90. He knows my grandfather is driving it to the North Ridge. He forges a 60% stock transfer using a compromised notary. He collects $1.5 million from a life insurance policy he tripled 2 weeks earlier. He uses that money to buy the very chemicals Vale died trying to stop. And then he bulldozes the smokehouse. Whatever was there, to hide the last of the evidence. Yes, Lucas said. That is the case, and now we prove it. A new, cold terror set in. We can't, I said, the logistical impossibility hitting me. My mother, Marjorie, she's not my father. She's not a sloppy, emotional man. She's cold. She watches everything, every email, every security log, every keycard swipe. She will see us talking. She'll know. I stood up. I was in my territory now. She may watch, but she doesn't understand the process. She doesn't speak the language. I looked at Lucas. We'll use the production codes, our batch numbering system. It's proprietary, based on tank number, date, and specific gravity readings. No one understands it but me and the lab team. If I send you an email about batch 41120, it means meet at tank 4 at 1120. If I mention a gravity spike, it means danger. We're being watched. Hold for stabilization means lay low. She'll just think I'm being my usual obsessive self, looping my new investor husband in on quality control data. Lucas stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than grief or anger in his eyes. It was respect. A gravity spike, he repeated, the words sounding strange in his mouth. Welcome to the company, Lucas, I said, walking past him to climb the stairs. Let's go to breakfast. 3 days after the wedding, Marjorie summoned us. We'll be having a small, formal dinner tonight, she announced via text message, a medium she despised and only used for issuing commands. 8 o'clock, the main dining room, to properly welcome Lucas to the family. I read the message in the cold, damp air of the cellar, the scent of Edmund Vale's herbs clinging to my sweater. I looked at Lucas, who was examining the copper still, his fingers tracing the verdigris. A performance review, he said, not looking up. She's decided the honeymoon is over. It's time to assess the new asset. She's hunting, I said. She doesn't know what for, but she knows something is off. She can feel the shift in the foundation. Let her, Lucas said, finally turning to me. We'll use the protocol. Your codes. I'll follow your lead. No, I said, thinking. Tonight, you lead. You're the one she wants to dissect. I'm just the supporting documentation. She already knows what I am. She thinks I'm a known quantity, predictable, obsessed with yields and tank schedules. I'm the dutiful, boring daughter. I'm your cover. And what is my cover? He asked. You're exactly what they bought, I replied, the words tasting like ash. You're the ruthless, brilliant equity investor who just saved their company. You're here to admire your purchase. You're one of them. Speak their language. Money, power, acquisitions. He nodded, his eyes cold and clear. I can do that. I sent a coded email from my phone, ostensibly to our head of fermentation, but CCing Lucas. Batch 30800. Hold for stabilization, monitoring gravity, expecting variance. The message was clear. Meet at Warehouse 3 at 8 a.m. Hold all external investigation. Expect a major risk event tonight. We're being watched. At 8 o'clock, I walked into the main dining room on my husband's arm. The room was a monument to Marjorie's fabricated legacy. The mahogany table was polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the cold, glittering light of the crystal chandelier. The silver was heavy, the porcelain ancient. It was a room designed to intimidate, to remind visitors of the weight of the Brooks name, a weight I now knew was hollow. My father, Gregory, was already there, a heavy glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked better than he had in months. The $62 million transfusion had worked. His color was back. His voice was booming. Lucas, there he is. Gregory clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of performative ownership. Come, sit. We're drinking the 94 Reserve, only the best for my new partner. Marjorie was at the head of the table, a queen surveying her court. She wore pearls and a dark silk dress, her smile as thin and sharp as a boning knife. Sloane was there too, tapping at her phone, probably already posting a story about the perfect family dinner. We sat. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and unspoken questions. So, Lucas, Gregory began, leaning forward as the staff poured a dark red wine. Now that you're settled in, I've been meaning to ask, your firm, Hale Equity, you've done a lot of import-export financing. That's your specialty, yes? This was Gregory's comfort zone. Logistics, shipping containers, the movement of goods. Lucas inclined his head, taking a sip of wine. He held the glass up to the light, appraising it. We've diversified, he said, his voice smooth. Our primary focus for the last 5 years has been on leveraged buyouts in the Pacific Northwest, identifying undervalued legacy brands, like this one, and optimizing their supply chains for international distribution. My background is in managing the transition. The Asian market, in particular, has an insatiable appetite for American heritage brands. It was perfect. He had recited his cover, the one my parents had bought, flawless in every detail. He sounded like every venture capitalist who had ever pitched them. He was speaking in a language they revered: profit, expansion, and market dominance. Exactly, Gregory beamed, relieved. A man who sees the global picture, not just farming. He waved a dismissive hand, as if the soil that paid for his house was a minor inconvenience. Marjorie was less impressed. She watched Lucas, her head tilted. She was the interrogator, and this first answer was merely for the record. Delaney, darling, Marjorie said, her gaze shifting to me. You've been quiet? Are the new arrangements satisfactory? She was asking if I was playing my part. I rearranged my features into the bland, professional mask I wore for board meetings. The transition is proceeding, I said, picking up my water glass. I was just noting that the service logistics for this dinner are very efficient. The plating is synchronized. Your timing is excellent. Sloane snorted. God, Delaney, can you turn it off for 1 second? It's dinner, not a bottling run. On the contrary, Lucas said, his voice cutting in smoothly. Delaney's attention to process is her greatest strength. It's the core asset of this company. You can't have a heritage brand without unwavering quality control. That's what our partners in Seoul and Tokyo are buying. Verifiable consistency. He had defended me, but not personally. He had defended me as an asset, a piece of the corporate structure. It was brilliant. My father raised his glass. To verifiable consistency. Marjorie did not raise her glass. She had let Gregory ask his superficial questions. Now it was her turn. But you're not just a numbers man. Are you, Lucas? She said, her voice soft. The staff had cleared the first course, and a stillness settled over the table. You bought into a family company. I've read your portfolio. You don't usually get this. Hands-on. Your presence here, in Oregon. It suggests a more personal interest. Perhaps a passion for the work, for the history of the business? The knife was out. This was the real question. Why are you here? I held my breath. Lucas smiled. A slow, appreciative smile, as if she had paid him a compliment. You're very perceptive. Marjorie, he said, the Brookhaven legacy is formidable. It's a classic American success story. I'll admit, I am fascinated by the entire narrative, how a small family farm becomes a regional powerhouse. He paused, taking another sip of wine. He set the glass down with a precise, soft click. I'm especially interested in the early days, that rapid growth phase, the decisions that were made, that period right before 2000. It's a compelling case study, so much rapid, decisive change. It's where the real foundations were laid. I was watching my father. When Lucas said pre-2000, Gregory's hand, which was resting on the stem of his wineglass, clenched. It was an involuntary, spasmodic tightening. I heard the faint, high-pitched scree of the crystal straining, a sound I knew from the lab, the sound of glass nearing its structural failure point. And then, a tiny spray of dark red wine, like an arterial spurt, shot from the bowl of the glass. It spattered the pristine white tablecloth. 3, 4, 5 dark spots, like a warning. Gregory froze, staring at the stain. Sloane, completely missing the subtext, sighed. Dad, honestly, you're spilling. Marjorie's eyes were fixed on her husband. Her expression was arctic. It was not anger at the spill. It was rage at his lack of control. He had just confirmed the sensitivity of the topic. He had just bled on the map, marking the treasure. Sloane, sensing the tension and bored by it, decided to create her own. Well, while you're all talking about boring old history, Delaney's been off on her own secret projects. I saw you sneaking off toward the east sector all afternoon. Laney, heading for the old warehouses. She turned to my mother. She's been disappearing every day. What's so interesting over there, in all that dirt and junk? I felt the blood drain from my face. It was an unguided missile, and it had hit its target. I saw Marjorie's gaze snap to me, her eyes suddenly sharp, suspicious. I had to use the truth as a shield. I'm not sneaking, Sloane, I said, my voice as level as I could make it. I turned to my father and Lucas, the businessmen. I'm standardizing a new process. It's a workflow for byproduct reclamation. We're currently composting thousands of tons of apple pomace. It's inefficient. I'm developing a protocol to extract and distill it into a line of botanical bitters. I was talking about Edmund Vail's work. I was saying his words in this house of lies. It's a value add, I continued, my voice gaining strength. It utilizes a zero-cost waste stream. Based on my initial projections, it could increase our profit margin per ton by 12, maybe even 15%, within 2 years. Gregory, relieved the subject had changed from the pre-2000 era, nodded enthusiastically. See? That's my daughter, always finding an angle. 15%. But Marjorie was not smiling. She knew about my bitters project. She was the one who had ordered me to shut it down 6 months ago. My sudden, renewed interest, now, was a red flag. She smiled, a thin, patronizing curl of her lip. "Delaney, darling," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you and your romantic little projects, don't try to dress up the waste. Some things are byproducts for a reason." Her eyes held mine, and the subtext was brutal. Some people are byproducts for a reason. "They're meant to be thrown away," she finished. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. She had dismissed me, and by extension, she had dismissed the entire hidden legacy of Edmund Vale. Lucas had been listening, his face a mask of polite interest. He set his fork down. He looked at Marjorie, his expression one of perfect, boyish curiosity. "That's so interesting," he said, his tone light. "Speaking of the early days, Marjorie, I was in the old cooperage, the one you use for storage. I was just admiring the craftsmanship on those massive, old casks, the decorative ones." My father tensed again. "I noticed an interesting logo burned into the wood," Lucas went on, his voice painfully naive. "It looked like a V? A very ornate V. I was just curious. Was the Brooks family partnered with someone back in the beginning? Another family, maybe? Someone with a V in their name?" It was a surgical strike, delivered with a smile. Marjorie's face did not change, but her eyes went flat and dead. All the light in them vanished. Gregory, however, exploded in a loud, forced bark of a laugh. It was 2 notes too high. "A V? God, no. That's ancient history. Junk. Just some old supplier logo from decades ago. A barrel maker. Long gone. Defunct." He was talking too fast, his hands gesturing wildly. "Not even worth mentioning. We really should have thrown those old things out years ago. They just clutter up the place." He took a large, desperate gulp of his wine. He was lying, and he was a terrible liar. The interrogation was over. My mother knew. She didn't know what Lucas was, or how he knew about the V, but she knew he was not an ally. She knew he was an enemy who had breached the gates. The dinner, meant to be an assessment of a new asset, had become the confirmation of a new, mortal threat. I looked down at my dessert plate. My hands were perfectly steady. Under the cover of the white tablecloth, I reached for my water glass. With the knuckle of my thumb, I tapped the crystal. 1 tap, pause, 2 taps. Code 1 to 2. Gravity spike. Acute risk. All non-essential operations cease. Across the table, Lucas met my gaze. His face was a mask of polite concern for his new, flustered father-in-law. But I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Message received. The war had begun. The dinner ended abruptly after Gregory's outburst. My mother's face was a mask of cold fury, not at Lucas, but at her husband's incompetence. He had revealed a vulnerability, and she despised weakness. We were dismissed like children. Lucas and I said nothing as we walked to the guest wing, where our charade of a marriage required us to share a suite. We stood in the opulent, silent room, the air still crackling with the unsaid threats from the dinner table. "He's scared," I said, unzipping the dress I'd worn as armor. "Gregory is a terrible liar." "He is," Lucas agreed, pulling off his tie. "But your mother is not. She heard V. She saw his reaction. She's not suspicious anymore. She's active." "The gravity spike is real," I said, using our code. The risk was no longer theoretical. "That new camera Sloan mentioned, I'm willing to bet it's already installed. We've lost the element of surprise. We have to move. Tonight." "Move where?" "The smokehouse," I said, pulling on my work jeans and a dark fleece. "The place my father bulldozed. Formula 12. The East Sector Smokehouse Blend. He bulldozed the building, but he wouldn't have dug out the foundation. Not if he was just trying to hide it from a satellite. He's arrogant. He'd just bury it." We left the house through the kitchen's service entrance, melting into the deep, moonless night of the valley. We carried no lights, using our knowledge of the terrain to navigate. We moved along the irrigation lines, our feet silent on the soft earth between the apple trees. The east sector was at the far edge of the property, a buffer zone of scrub oak and wild grasses that my father had never bothered to cultivate after his expansion plans failed. It was junk land, forgotten. We used the small, bright beam of Lucas's aluminum flashlight, shielding it with our hands. I had Edmund Vale's leather-bound recipe book in my backpack, the one containing the smokehouse blend. Tucked inside was the satellite photo from 1998. The building was here, I whispered, comparing the photo to the ridge of dark trees ahead of us, just past that stand of birches, where the ground dips. We pushed through a dense thicket of blackberry vines, the thorns tearing at our clothes. The air was different here, stagnant. This land felt sick, unused. "Here," Lucas said, stopping. He pointed the beam at the ground. The dip. It was almost imperceptible in the dark, but he was right. The ground was not level. It was a slight, rectangular depression, exactly the size of the foundation in the photograph. It was overgrown with weeds and covered in a thick, wet carpet of rotting leaves. "He just pushed the walls in and buried it," I said, my voice thick with disgust. We began to clear the leaves, scraping with our boots and hands. The damp, decayed smell of a quarter-century of mulch filled the air. My fingers hit something hard, cold, and flat. Lucas. He aimed the light. It wasn't rock. It was concrete. A perfect 9-by-9-inch square, with a small rusted iron D-ring set into it, a lid, a hatch. It took both of us. We braced our feet, gripped the iron ring, and pulled. It was sealed shut with packed dirt and roots. With a groan of protest, the seal broke. We heaved the small concrete slab aside. It revealed a black square. Stone steps, slick with damp, descended into the earth. The smell that rose from the opening was not the herbal, scientific scent of Vale's main cellar. This was the smell of time itself, stagnant air, mildew, dust, and the faint, acidic tang of old bottles. I went first, Lucas right behind me, his flashlight beam on my feet. The steps were steep and ended in a low, cramped room with a floor of packed earth. It was a root cellar, or perhaps a bunker. Lucas found a switch, identical to the one in the main cellar. He flipped it. A single, fly-specked bulb flickered to life, casting a weak yellow light. It was a time capsule. The room was filled with wooden racks, and the racks were filled with bottles, dozens of them. They were full of a dark, viscous liquid. The labels, unlike the elegant script in the lab, were professionally printed. My hand was shaking as I picked one up and wiped the grime from the paper. Brookhaven and Vale, Botanical Bitters. It wasn't just a side project, I whispered, stunned. It wasn't a secret. They were in production. This was a commercial product. He wasn't just my grandfather's partner, Lucas said, his voice dangerously quiet. He was his brand. Brookhaven was the farm. Vale was the quality. My grandfather was the name. Your father erased him. In the corner, under a collapsed shelf, was a metal box, an old gray time clock, the kind you'd feed a card into. Next to it, scattered on the floor like dead snakes, were thick rolls of paper, payroll tapes. I unrolled one. Week ending March 12th, 1999. It was a list of names, not the Brooks Harvest crew I knew, but a different set of workers. Vale, manager, Vali, distiller, Jimenez, Amy, bottling. His family, Lucas said, touching the paper. He was employing his own relatives. This was his operation. I unrolled another spool. Week ending March 19th, 1999. The last week? The week of the accident. The paper was cut. A ragged tear at the end of the day. The final payouts. Never made. He didn't just kill Vale, I said. He destroyed an entire branch of this company. He put all these people out of work. He buried the payroll. Then, I saw it. On a small, three-legged stool in the darkest corner sat a simple wooden box. It was not dusty like the rest of the room. It looked like a cigar box. It felt deliberate. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of stained waxed cloth, was a small 3-inch piece of metal tubing. It was oily to the touch, the ends jagged, as if it had been sheared. It was a brake line. Beneath it was the cloth it had been wrapped in. It was stiff with old wax, but there was writing on it, a hurried, desperate-looking scrawl in black grease pencil. "Don't let him drive the North Hill. Check the lines." My stomach twisted. This was it. This was the murder weapon, a mechanic's warning. Maybe? Or a note from someone who saw Gregory tampering with the tractor? Someone who was too scared to speak up, who had left this here instead. A silent, buried testimony. I set the box down. My mind, my logistics-trained mind, took over. I was no longer a daughter. I was no longer a bride. I was a quality control manager documenting a critical failure. "We don't touch it again," I said, my voice sharp and clear. I took out my phone. "We document in situ." I began taking photographs, my hands steady, the box, the brake line, the cloth, the note, the payroll tapes, the bottles, the labels. "I have sterile sampling bags in my office," I said, my mind working. "I have evidence tags. I'll come back. I'll bag it. I'll code it." "Delaney," Lucas's voice was sharp. He had clicked off the flashlight. "What?" "The light. Turn off the light." I looked up. He was staring at the narrow gap where the cellar door was. "Turn it off." I hit the switch, plunging us into absolute cold blackness. The only sound was my own heart, hammering against my ribs. And then I heard it, the crunch of gravel, a vehicle, moving slowly on the dirt access road that ran along the east sector. A beam of light cut through the night. Headlights. They were blindingly bright, sweeping across the trees, illuminating the blackberry thicket not 20 feet from our hidden door. The truck stopped. The engine idled, a low, threatening rumble. We didn't breathe. I was pressed against the cold stone wall, the smell of mildew and old secrets filling my lungs. This was it. He had followed us, or worse, he was checking on his burial ground. The headlights clicked off. Silence. Total, absolute, terrifying silence. My mind was screaming, "He's getting out. He's walking over. He sees the disturbed leaves. He sees the open hatch." I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The engine roared. The headlights snapped back on, blindingly bright. The truck accelerated, spitting gravel, and continued down the road toward the main highway. We waited, our bodies rigid in the dark, for a full minute before Lucas let out a long, shaky breath. He turned his flashlight back on, the beam carefully aimed at the floor. "That was your father," he said. "That was his truck," I said. "He was patrolling, or he was checking. After that dinner, he's spooked. He's revisiting his sins." We climbed out of the cellar, my body shaking with adrenaline. We replaced the concrete lid, scattering the leaves over it, trying to make it look as undisturbed as possible. We were halfway back to the house, sticking to the deepest shadows of the orchard, when I saw it. "Lucas, stop." I pointed. Mounted on the high eave of warehouse number 3, the very building that housed the entrance to Vale's main cellar, was a new piece of equipment, a small, black, dome-shaped object. It was a security camera, a high-spec, pan-tilt-zoom model. Its tiny red infrared light was active, glowing like a demon's eye in the dark. And it was aimed directly at the access road to the east sector. "She didn't wait," I whispered, a new, cold fear replacing the adrenaline. "Marjorie, that dinner, it wasn't an interrogation, it was a confirmation. She's already started her countermove. She's watching us." "She just watched her husband drive to the one place he shouldn't be," Lucas said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "She's watching him too." "It doesn't matter," I said, pulling him into the shadow of a water tank. "We're locked out. We can't go back to the cellar. We can't go back to the smokehouse. She's watching every move we make outside. We're trapped." Lucas looked at me, his face a mask of shadows. Then we stop moving outside. We move inside. Inside? The house, the office, the safe, the originals, the insurance policy, the transfer document, the notary's file. Your father is a sloppy sentimentalist. Your mother is a cold-blooded pragmatist. They wouldn't destroy the documents that give them their power. They'd hide them. The main office safe, I said. Behind the portrait of my great-grandfather. I know the combination. Then we go, now. No, I said, my mind racing, calculating. We can't. Marjorie will be in there, at her desk, reviewing the footage from this camera. She won't sleep, and Gregory will be with her, trying to explain why he was driving around the east sector. They're in that office for the rest of the night. So we wait? No, I said. We create an event. We can't get them out of the office with a request. We have to force them out. We have to create a crisis so severe, so expensive, that they have no choice but to leave the office, both of them, at the same time. What kind of crisis? I looked toward the gleaming stainless steel tanks of the main production facility. My facility. A technical one, I said. A cold, hard plan forming. A catastrophic one. I looked at Lucas. We're going to have to risk a vintage. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to report a critical temperature failure in Tank 12, the Autumn Reserve, our biggest seller. I'll rig the sensors. It will look like we're about to lose 50,000 gallons of product. Gregory will panic over the money. Marjorie will panic over the breach in process. They'll both come running. And while they're at the tank, you go to the safe. What if one of them stays behind? What if Marjorie sends Gregory alone? She won't. I'm the only one who knows the stabilization protocols for that tank. She'll need me. And she'll come with Gregory to make sure I'm not romanticizing the byproducts. She won't let him handle it alone. Not now. And if we're caught? Lucas asked. If one of them finds me in the office? I met his gaze. The pact was being sealed. We prepare our stories. They align with our established personas. You are the curious investor. You were just looking around, admiring the history. You got lost. You're fascinated by the old family portraits. And you? I am the head of logistics, I said, my voice as cold as the steel of the tanks. I am dealing with an urgent, time-sensitive, and highly technical crisis that threatens the entire Q4 projection. I have no time for their questions. It's a high-risk gamble, Lucas said. It's the only move we have left, I replied. Now we wait for sunrise. The morning air was cold and sharp. I was in the QC lab by 6 a.m., long before the sun hit the valley floor. The target was Tank 12, the 50,000-gallon stainless steel behemoth that held our entire autumn reserve. It was the flagship. It was the one asset my father would protect above all else. I opened the control panel, my hands steady. This was my territory. I bypassed the primary thermal probe, routing its signal through a digital processor I had programmed during the night. I set the code to run, a gradual, alarming temperature climb, 57 degrees, 58, 59, then 60, the critical failure point. The alarm was deafening, a shrieking pulse that echoed off the steel. Red lights strobed across the white, sterile room. I picked up the internal phone, dialed my father's office, and let the panic I should have been feeling bleed into my voice. This is Delaney in QC. I have a critical temperature variance in Tank 12. Repeat, critical. The main glycol coolant feed is unresponsive. We are facing catastrophic failure of the Autumn Reserve. I need both of you in fermentation immediately. I did not have to wait long. I heard my father yelling before the heavy steel door slammed open. What is this? What did you do? Gregory burst in, his face already purple. That's 50,000 gallons. That's our entire Q4 shipment. You're ruining us. Marjorie was right behind him. She was not panicked. She was a block of ice. Her eyes were not on the flashing console. They were on me. She knew. She did not know how, but she knew this was a fabrication. But the red light was flashing. The digital readout showed the temperature climbing. The financial risk. The one thing she truly respected was real. "Show me," she commanded. "It's the main coolant feed, I think," I said, turning my back to her, my fingers flying across the console. I had to play my part perfectly. "The valve isn't responding to the automated command. If I can't stabilize the temperature in the next 20 minutes, the entire batch will turn. The yeast will die, and we'll be dumping 50,000 gallons of vinegar." "Fix it!" Gregory shrieked, clawing at his hair. "Do something!" "I am," I snapped, my voice sharp with the authority I always used in a crisis. "And I need absolute focus. I need no interruptions. This is a delicate system. One wrong command and I could flash pasteurize the entire tank." Marjorie hesitated. I could feel her gaze on my back. She glanced toward the office, where she had left her bank of new security monitors. She was weighing the risk, leaving the office unguarded, or staying and potentially losing a significant portion of their new, clean money. The money won. She could not risk ignoring a 50,000-gallon loss. "Do it," she said. Her voice clipped. She crossed her arms, a sentinel of ice, her eyes burning into me. The trap was set. They were both here. They were both contained. The moment I saw them cross the gravel yard from the guest wing window, I moved. I counted to 10, giving them time to be fully engaged in the lab, and then I was out the door. The main house was quiet. I entered my father's office. The new camera Marjorie had installed was on her desk monitor, its feed showing a clear, empty view of the access road to the east sector. She was watching for an external threat, never imagining the threat was now inside. I walked to the large, imposing oil painting of my great-grandfather. I lifted it. The heavy canvas swung away on a silent hinge, revealing the dull gray steel of the safe. My father was a creature of habit. The combination was a series of family birth dates, a pathetic, sentimental choice that I had known since I was a teenager. I did not need a stethoscope. My fingers moved, the tumblers clicking with satisfying, mechanical precision. Click, whir, click. The heavy door swung open with a soft sigh. It smelled of old paper and my father's cigar smoke. I bypassed the stacks of cash. I was here for the paper, the real currency of their power. I found the binder labeled Insurance First. Tucked in the back was the addendum. The policy on Edmund Vale, increased to $1.5 million. The signature was my father's. The date was 13 days before the accident. Motive. I found the equipment file, a logbook for the Vale 90. I flipped to 1999, a maintenance slip, signed off by a mechanic I'd never heard of. Certifying the tractor was in perfect working order. The date of the service was 3 days after the accident, a sloppy, panicked forgery to cover his tracks. Cover-up. Then, the document I came for. The original. Transfer of shares. It was heavy bond paper. The ink faded to a rusty brown. I stared at the notary stamp, Alicia Mendez, and the date. The date I knew, from the newspaper archives, that she was lying in a hospital bed, unable to hold a pen, the legal nail, the theft. I was about to close the safe when something else caught my eye. A separate, thinner file, marked only RAL. I opened it. It was a printed email, not from my father, but from Marjorie, addressed to a Riverside assessment lab, an organization I had never heard of. The subject line was, Soil Mitigation Query. The body was short and brutal. The anomalous readings from the east sector must be adjusted. They need to be attributed to natural mineral deposits, not agricultural runoff. This is not a request. Please confirm receipt and adjustment of the final report. Marjorie. She had not just been a passive beneficiary. She was the cleanup crew. She was the one who buried the chemical evidence my father had been pouring onto the land. The accomplice. I pulled out my phone. The office was silent. The only sound the faint hum of the computer monitor. I turned off the flash. Click, click, click. I photographed every page. The addendum, the fake log, the forged transfer, the email. I carefully replaced the files, making sure the stack was exactly as I had found it. I even blew a small puff of dust from the bottom of the safe back onto the top of the binders. I was closing the heavy steel door when I heard it, the sound of the doorknob turning. I moved, in the split second it took for the latch to disengage. I was across the room, melting into the shadows behind the massive, 6-foot-tall bank of filing cabinets. The gap between the metal and the wall was barely a foot wide, leading to a dark walk-in supply closet. I pressed myself flat, my heart hammering against the cold plaster. The door opened. "Gregory?" He walked in, muttering to himself. "Glycol pressure. She doesn't know what she's... just..." He stopped. He was standing in the middle of the room. He sniffed the air. Like an animal. Had I left a scent? He looked at the desk, at the chair Lucas had used the night before, the chair I had just used to look at the email. It was angled just slightly, half an inch out of place. He walked toward it. He cocked his head, his suspicion a palpable thing in the room. He could feel it, the displacement of the air, the wrongness. He looked directly at the filing cabinets, at the dark gap where I was hiding. My lungs burned. I held my breath. If he walked over, if he looked, I was caught. Back in the fermentation room, the tension was a different kind of poison. "The pH is spiking," I lied, holding a test strip to the light, the paper unchanging. "That's bad. That means the yeast is dying from the heat. It's triggering a secondary fermentation." "What does that mean?" Gregory yelled, having just returned. "It means I have to run a full CO2 output diagnostic," I said, my eyes fixed on the console. "It's the only way to know if we can salvage it. That's another 7 minutes. Minimum." "7 minutes," he shouted. "We'll lose it all by then." "Then be quiet and let me work," I snapped. Marjorie's eyes narrowed. She knew I was stalling, but she did not know why. The 7 minutes had begun. Gregory was still standing in the office, staring at the filing cabinet. He took a step toward it. The office door burst open again, slamming against the wall. "Sloan." "Mother, are you in here?" she called out, already filming the empty room with her phone for some reason. "Seriously, where is everyone? That billionaire guy just pulled up. The one from the yacht club? He's asking for you. He looks really annoyed." Gregory's suspicions shattered, replaced by a fresh wave of social and financial panic. "Your mother is in the lab. A crisis. Go get her. Tell her the Rutherford account is here. Go." Fine," Sloan pouted, lowering her phone and storming out. Gregory, now agitated by a new, more immediate crisis, grabbed the file he had presumably come for, the Rutherford account, and walked quickly out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The room was empty. I counted to 30, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I slipped from the closet, crossed the room, and was out the door. I took the long way back, through the barrel hall, to give myself time. I re-entered the lab just as Sloan was bursting in. "Mom! The Rutherford guy is here. He looks bored. Dad's freaking out." Marjorie's head snapped toward Sloan, a real billionaire, a tangible asset, waiting. She looked at me. She looked at the console, where I was now running a final diagnostic. I hit the command to reboot the sensor. "Wait," I said, as if surprised. "The temperature. It's stabilizing. It's dropping." I typed a few more commands, undoing the bypass. "It must have been a sensor short, a false reading. We're fine. The batch is stable." Gregory looked like he was going to weep with relief. "Delaney! My God, you saved it! You saved the reserve!" Marjorie's eyes were black holes. She knew. She knew she had been played. She knew she had left the office, her command center, unguarded. She turned without a single word and swept out of the lab, Sloan trailing in her wake. "Just doing my job. Dad," I said, my hands shaking so hard I could barely stand. "Just quality control." That night, well past midnight, we met in the only place that was safe, the stone cellar beneath Warehouse 3. The air was cold, smelling of earth and Edmund Vale's forgotten genius. The only light came from the single, bare bulb overhead. We laid it all out on the dusty workbench. I had the small wooden box from the smokehouse. I placed the jagged, oily piece of cut brake line in the center. The means. Lucas had his phone. He transferred the images to my laptop, and we looked at them, one by one, projected on the stone wall. The insurance addendum. Motive. The faked tractor maintenance log. The first cover-up. The forged stock transfer. The impossible notary stamp. The theft. And Marjorie's email. The accomplice. The second cover-up. "It's all here," Lucas whispered, his voice raw in the small space. I looked at the collection of evidence, from the physical piece of metal that had killed his grandfather to the digital proof of my mother's corruption. It was not just a random assortment of clues, it was a structure. "It's the spine," I said. "We just assembled the spine of a murder case. We had the motive, the means, and the 25-year cover-up. We had everything we needed to break them. My professionalism is a shield. In the 24 hours after discovering the full scope of my parents' crimes, I treated the evidence as I would any compromised asset. I secured it, I diversified it, and I created redundancy. In the cold, pre-dawn silence of the cellar, I executed a 3-layer data backup. First, I copied every photograph and digital file onto an encrypted partition on my personal laptop. Second, I transferred the entire dossier onto 2 separate, air-gapped USB drives. Third, I used the old printer in the main office, while my parents slept, to print hard copies of the insurance addendum, the forged transfer, and Marjorie's email. I now had digital, physical, and paper proof. A single point of failure is unacceptable in logistics. A single location for this evidence was a liability I would not tolerate. At 8 a.m., I sent a package via a bonded courier to a private law firm in Portland. The lawyer was a woman I had met at a supply chain conference, known for her aggressive litigation and corporate fraud. The package contained one of the USB drives and a simple, coded note. "Corporate malfeasance investigation. Hold for my instructions. High risk. The asset was now off-site." At 10 a.m., Lucas and I drove the oldest, most unremarkable farm truck, one without a GPS tracker, into the town of Yamhill. The county sheriff's office smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. We did not ask for a detective, we asked for the sheriff. Sheriff Dana Morales was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to absorb everything and reflect nothing. She did not seem impressed by the Brookhaven name. She seemed annoyed by the interruption. We sat at a metal table under flickering fluorescent lights. I did not begin with a story. I began with data. I laid out the printed copies in a matrix. "Sheriff," I began, my voice cold and steady, "I am the head of logistics at Brookhaven. I am here to report a series of financial and material irregularities that I have traced back 25 years. I pointed to the first document. Motive, an insurance policy addendum, increasing the payout for the death of a partner, Edmund Vale, to $1.5 million. It was signed 13 days before his death. I laid down the next, theft, a transfer of 60% of the company's shares from the Vale Trust to Gregory Brooks. It is dated 24 hours after the death. I placed the archival newspaper clipping next to it. The forgery, the notary on the transfer, Alicia Mendez, was admitted to the hospital 3 days prior to this date, following a massive stroke. She could not have signed it. Morales' expression, previously bored, sharpened. She leaned forward. I continued. The cover-up, Part 1, a falsified maintenance log for the tractor involved, the Vale 90, dated 3 days after the accident, certifying it was in perfect condition. I placed the final printout on the table. The cover-up, Part 2, a recent email from my mother, Marjorie Brooks, to an unregistered entity called Riverside Assessment Lab, ordering the adjustment of soil reports to attribute chemical anomalies to natural deposits. She was, and is, actively suppressing evidence of the chemical pivot my father initiated with the insurance money. I finished with the photograph from my phone, showing the cut brake line in the wooden box, and the means, found in a buried smokehouse on the property, along with this note: "Don't let him drive the North Hill." Morales was silent for a long time. She looked from the evidence to me, then to Lucas. "This is a clean narrative, Ms. Brooks, very clean." "It's not a narrative, Sheriff," I said. "It's a process log, and it points to murder, fraud, and a quarter-century of conspiracy." "Mr. Hale," she said, turning to Lucas, "and your role?" "Edmund Vale was my grandfather," Lucas said, his voice quiet but heavy as iron. "I am here to see this through." Morales nodded, the last piece clicking into place. "This is enough to request a warrant for the originals, but to get a judge to sign off on searching the home of Gregory and Marjorie Brooks, I'm going to need more than copies. I'm going to need your sworn, formal testimony, both of you, on the record." "We'll give it," I said. "But a warrant is a blunt instrument," Lucas countered, leaning forward. "The moment your cars roll up that drive, they will know. Marjorie will bleach the servers. Gregory will burn the documents. They are already suspicious. We need to secure the physical evidence, yes, but we also need to break them before their lawyers can build a firewall." Morales stared at him. "What you're suggesting is dangerous. This isn't a TV show. These are powerful people." "We are aware," I said. "We have a plan for that. What we need from you is the warrant, ready to go, and we need you to be ready to execute it, not on your time, on our signal." She disliked this. I could see the procedural lines in her face tighten, but she also saw the truth in our evidence. "I'll prepare the warrant," she said, standing. "I'll have a judge on standby. I'll need your sworn statements this afternoon. But, Brooks, if you do this, you'd better be right, and you'd better be fast." We drove back to the estate in the rattling farm truck, the green hills, the rows of perfect, heavy-laden apple trees, rolled past the window, my home, the place I had dedicated my life to protecting. I pulled the truck over onto the gravel shoulder of a service road, the engine ticking as it cooled. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were shaking, not from fear, but from the sickening, tectonic weight of what I had just done. "I just set the trigger to tear my family apart," I whispered, staring at the main house in the distance, the grand white building that was a monument to a lie. "I'm about to testify against my parents. I am actively planning their ruin. They will go to prison. I'm sending my own mother and father to prison." The words tasted like poison. This was not the clean satisfaction of solving a problem. This was not a recall or a batch failure. This was an amputation. I was cutting away the very root of my own life, knowing the rot was too deep to save. Lucas was silent, watching the house. He did not offer comfort. He offered clarity. "The real legacy is the truth, Delaney," he said, his voice firm. "It's not the name on the gate. It's the soil under it. What they did. That's not a legacy. It's a debt. We're just finally paying the bill." His words focused me. He was right. This was not a family I was betraying. It was a conspiracy I was ending. I put the truck in gear and drove on. We could not risk the cellars or the house. Marjorie's new camera saw too much. We formulated the final step in the one place they would never think to look. The cold, derelict tractor shed on the North Hill, the very place Edmund Vale had begun his last drive. It was damp, smelling of old oil and rust. In the back, covered by a heavy, rotting tarp, was the wreckage of the Vale 90 tractor, a green metal skeleton. It was the perfect stage. "The warrant isn't enough," I said, my voice echoing in the metal shed. "Their lawyers will argue illegal search, coercion. They will bury us in motions. We have the data, but we need the confession. We need to hear them say it." "You want to make them confess?" Lucas asked. "I want to record them confessing," I corrected. "Right here, at the scene of the crime." We began to prepare the trap. We dragged the heavy oil-stained workbench to the center of the shed. We ran a single, bare-bulbed work light from a utility outlet, hanging it low over the bench. It cast a harsh, theatrical light, throwing deep, dark shadows. I had risked one trip back to the smokehouse. I placed the wooden box on the bench. I opened it. The cut brake line, the metal witness, gleamed dully in the light. Next came the technology. Lucas, drawing on his firm's corporate espionage resources, had the gear. He affixed a tiny, high-resolution audio-video recorder to the button of his dark shirt. I taped a secondary, audio-only digital recorder to the underside of the workbench. 2 layers of redundancy, I said. I'll have my own phone recording from inside that pile of oil cans. The stage was set. Now, the lure. I used a burner phone. I called the main security office, the one I knew Marjorie monitored. I pitched my voice high, forcing a tremor into it, my crisis voice. "This is Delaney Brooks. I'm on the North Hill. My God, there's someone in the old tractor shed. I saw a flashlight. They're poking around the old Vale wreckage." The guard on duty, a man I knew was loyal to Marjorie, replied instantly, "I'll alert Mrs. Brooks." "No!" I half screamed, playing the part. "Don't! You know how she's been about security. She said all threats must be handled by her or my father personally. She doesn't want the staff involved. Call them directly. Tell them someone is in the tractor shed. Tell them I'm here and I'm scared. Tell them to come now." I hung up. This was the key. By using Marjorie's own paranoid protocol against her, I had bypassed any chance of a guard showing up. She would see this as a threat to her secrets. She and Gregory would come, and they would come alone. We killed the work light, plunging the shed into near darkness. We waited. "The roles," I said, my voice a low whisper. "We have to be clear. I'm the daughter. I'm confused. I'm terrified. I'm the one who found this. They're used to me being emotional and unstable under pressure. Let them focus on me." "And me?" Lucas asked. "You are Edmund Vale's grandson. You are the prosecutor. You are cold, logical, and you have questions. You're the threat they didn't see. I'll be the bait. You'll be the hammer." We heard the distant crunch of gravel, the sound of a heavy truck engine being pushed too hard up the hill. "I've just texted Sheriff Morales," I said, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. "She's on standby at the diner on the highway, 6 minutes away. The moment we have what we need, I send the word, execute." The truck doors slammed outside, the sound echoing in the night. Lucas pressed the button on his shirt. I started the recording on my phone. Heavy. Angry footsteps approached the shed. The old door scraped open. "Showtime," I whispered. The door scraped open, slamming against the interior metal wall with a sound like a gunshot. Gregory burst in first, his face flushed and his chest heaving from the climb up the hill. He was angry, ready for a fight. Marjorie followed, a precise, cold shadow gliding in behind him. She was not angry, she was annoyed, as if dismissing an incompetent employee. The shed was immediately suffocating. The air, already thick with the metallic tang of old rust and the heavy, cloying smell of congealed motor oil, now felt like the sealed-off air of a crypt. It was the scent of the past, and my parents had just walked right back into their grave. "Dad! Mom! Thank God!" I backed away, injecting a calculated tremor into my voice, gesturing wildly at Lucas. I had to be the frightened daughter, the one who had stumbled into something she did not understand. "It's him. It's Lucas. I found him in here. He was just standing here, looking at the old tractor." Gregory rounded on Lucas, his fists clenched. "What in the hell do you think you're doing? You've been following my daughter? Prowling around my property like a thief?" Lucas did not move. He stood in the harsh, swinging light of the single bare bulb, his face half in shadow. He was perfectly, unnervingly calm. "This isn't your property, Gregory. Not all of it." "I just paid $62 million to save this company," Gregory roared, jabbing a finger at him. "No," Lucas said, his voice quiet, but it cut through the damp air like a razor. "You just paid the debt on a company you stole 25 years ago, from my grandfather." The name hung in the air. Gregory's face went from purple to a sick, mottled gray, Marjorie, who had been brushing dust from her sleeve, went utterly still. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice flat. "My mother was a Lara Vale," Lucas said, his eyes locked on hers. "My grandfather was Edmund Vale." Gregory took an involuntary step back, as if he had been physically struck. You're... "And I found what you buried," Lucas said. He did not reach for a weapon. He raised his cell phone. He swiped the screen. "The insurance addendum, the one you signed 13 days before the accident, increasing his death benefit to $1.5 million. He swiped again, the screen's cold light illuminating his face. "The forged stock transfer, the one supposedly notarized by Alicia Mendez while she was lying in a hospital bed, in a coma, the one that signed over his 60% share to you." The sight of the documents, even as tiny images on a phone, broke Gregory's paralysis. "You!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You were in my office. You were in my safe. That is private. That's my property. You invaded my home. I'll have you arrested for theft." "You're going to stand there and talk about theft?" Lucas asked, his voice dangerously soft. "After you stole his company? After you stole his land?" "He didn't just steal the land, Dad," I said. My voice was no longer shaking. It was as cold as the concrete floor. Marjorie's head snapped toward me. The mask of the terrified, hysterical daughter was gone. She saw me for what I was. I stepped forward, my hand gripping the heavy canvas tarp that covered the wreckage of the Vale 90. He stole his life. With one violent pull, I ripped the tarp back. It slid off the machine with a sound like a heavy, final sigh, releasing a cloud of dust and the smell of decay. The green metal skeleton of the tractor sat there, a monument to their crime. And on the workbench, directly under the swinging bulb, sat the small wooden box. Inside it, the oily, jagged piece of metal, the cut brake line. Gregory stared at it. He looked like a man who had just seen his own ghost. That's just junk," he stammered, his eyes wide, unblinking. That's nothing." Lucas stepped up to the bench. He pointed at the small piece of metal. "This is the nothing that killed Edmund Vale. This is the brake line from that tractor. You knew he was driving the North Hill that morning. You knew the grade of the road. You knew what would happen when he tried to stop." Lucas looked up, his gaze locking with my father's. "You cut it, didn't you?" The silence in the shed was absolute. It was thicker than the dust, heavier than the rust. It was the sound of 25 years of lies holding their breath. I could hear the faint, high-pitched buzz of the cheap bulb overhead. Gregory's mouth opened and closed. A wet, gasping sound came out, but no words. He was drowning in the quiet. "He was going to ruin us!" The words finally exploded out of him, a raw, desperate confession. He was crying, his face collapsing into a mask of self-pity. He was going to sell. He was going to sell his 60% to an outside firm, a hostile takeover. He called us poison. He said we were destroying his precious soil. He was gesturing wildly, tears streaming down his face, looking at me, pleading. He would have bankrupted us. He would have left us with nothing. We would have lost the house, the land, everything my great-grandfather built. It wasn't. I didn't mean. I had to stop him. I had to. I did what was necessary. He looked at me, his eyes begging for absolution. "Delaney, you understand. Business. You understand. It was a business decision. To protect the legacy. To protect you." "A business decision," Lucas repeated, his voice laced with contempt. "Stop sniveling. Gregory, it's pathetic." My mother's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold as a shard of ice. She stepped forward, out of the shadows, her face a mask of pure reptilian calm. She looked at the brake line, then at Lucas. "He's right," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "The man was a romantic fool. He was an anchor. He was going to sink us for the sake of sustainability." Gregory was weak. He hesitated. He almost let that fool destroy our lives. She stopped, adjusting the cuff of her silk blouse, as if discussing a poor quarterly report. He just needed, she said, a push in the right direction. I told him a single, decisive action was required, and he was failing to take it. So I made it clear, and it worked. We have had 25 years of stability, 25 years of success, all built on that one necessary moment. A push in the right direction. She was not an accomplice. She was the architect. My father was the hand. But she was the mind. She had ordered the execution. The confession hung in the air, cold, complete, and monstrous. Lucas Hale smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Thank you, Marjorie," he said. He did not raise his phone. He simply tapped the top button of his dark shirt. Then he slowly, deliberately, pulled his phone from his pocket. He was not showing them evidence from the past. He was showing them the present. He turned the screen toward them. The red recording icon was active. A digital timer was ticking upward. 17 minutes and 34 seconds. 35. 36. The numbers glowed in the dark. A digital heartbeat counting down the end of their lives. Gregory made a sound, a low, animal whimper, and staggered back. Marjorie's mask of control finally, terrifyingly, shattered. Her face contorted. It was not fear. It was pure, distilled rage. Her eyes snapped from the phone, past Lucas, and locked onto me. "You," she hissed. The word was venom. She lunged at me, not to strike, but as if she could destroy me with her proximity. "You did this. After everything we gave you. The name. The company. We saved you. We paid $62 million to secure your future. We gave you this man. And you ungrateful little thing." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I had been her quality control manager for 12 years. I had been her daughter for 32. I was done. "You didn't give me a legacy," I said, my voice as cold and dead as the cellar air. "You gave me a crime scene. You didn't save my future. You built it on a man's grave." I looked her directly in the eyes. "Murder isn't a legacy. Mother, it's a felony." That word, felony, broke the spell. It was the one word of consequence in her entire vocabulary. Marjorie looked at Lucas, at his phone, at the glowing red light on his chest. Gregory looked at the shed door. Panic, raw and animal, finally took over. Gregory turned and ran. He scrambled out of the shed, stumbling in the dark like a drunk. Marjorie gave me one last look, a look of such profound hatred it will be burned into my memory forever. Then she turned, not running, but walking fast, and followed him. We heard the truck doors slam. The engine roared, the tires spinning on the dirt, catching and spitting gravel. The headlights snapped on, sweeping across the dark hill like a scythe, cutting through the trees. The truck fishtailed, found traction, and disappeared down the hill. The shed was suddenly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the low buzz of the single light bulb. I pulled out my phone. My own recording was still active. I stopped it. I sent a single text to Sheriff Dana Morales. "Execute." Lucas stopped his recordings. He pulled the small digital audio recorder from under the bench. He handed me the USB drive from his pocket. "The full file," he said. "The video from my shirt, the audio from the bench, everything." "She'll be waiting for us," I said, my voice hollow. "Sheriff Morales?" "Yes." We walked out of the shed. We left the tarp off the Vale 90. We left the box with the brake line on the bench, sitting in the harsh circle of light, a perfect, waiting tableau for forensics. We met Sheriff Morales at the Highway Diner, the one just 6 minutes from our gate. The air smelled of burnt coffee and old grease. I handed her the USB drive without a word. She plugged it into a laptop in her car. She put on headphones. She listened, watching the video, for a full 5 minutes, her face grim. She looked up at me, her eyes hard. "You did it. You got them. Cold." She nodded, closing the laptop. I'll have the warrant signed by a judge before sunrise. By 6 a.m., we'll be at their door." The sun rose at 5:58 a.m. At 6 o'clock, two squad cars belonging to the Yamhill County Sheriff's Department rolled up the long gravel drive to the main house. They did not use their sirens. The only sound was the crunch of tires, a sound that cut through the morning mist. I was not there to see it. Lucas and I were in the guest house, 100 yards away, sitting in a sterile silence, having given our final, signed statements 2 hours earlier. I knew it was happening because Miguel, my orchard manager, texted me. "Police, they are at the main house." A minute later, another text. "They are going inside." The workers on the early bottling shift, the ones who had arrived before sunrise, all stopped. The machinery hissed into silence. I was told later that all 43 employees, plus the morning harvest crew, stood by the massive plate glass windows of the production facility, watching the main house. They watched as Sheriff Morales, flanked by 2 deputies, walked into my father's office. My parents were waiting, flanked by their lawyers. They had not slept. The workers saw it all through the glass. They saw Sheriff Morales present the warrant. They saw my father, Gregory, turn a shade of purple they had only seen when a shipment was late. They saw my mother, Marjorie, stand up, her face a mask of cold, imperious rage. They saw the handcuffs. They watched, in a silence described to me as heavy as wet stone, as my father, the proud patriarch of Brookhaven, was read his rights, his hands cuffed behind his back. They watched as my mother, the icy queen of the valley, was processed with the same cold, impersonal efficiency. The perp walk was not for the cameras, it was for the employees. My parents were walked out the front door and down the main path, directly past the wall of silent witnesses at the production facility. No one spoke. No one cheered. It was the sound of a dynasty collapsing into its own rotten foundation. By 8 a.m., the news vans had arrived, like vultures spotting a kill. The headline was on every station by noon. Brookhaven founders arrested, charged in 25-year-old cold case murder of partner Edmund Vale. I sat in the sterile quiet of the guest house, watching the blurred images on the television. I felt nothing. The adrenaline from the night before, the cold, righteous fury, had evaporated. All that was left was a vast, hollow, echoing emptiness. There was no victory. There was no satisfaction. It was the sickening, hollow ache of a necessary amputation. I had cut the rot out, and now I was left with the gaping wound. The next day, the emptiness was replaced by a fresh, cold shock. "They're out," Lucas said, walking into the room, his eyes on his phone. "Out? Bail, $4.5 million, posted this morning." The sum was obscene, meaningless. They had treated it like a parking fine, and with their release, the war began. Their lead attorney, a shark from Portland, held a press conference on the courthouse steps. "These charges are a fantasy," he declared, his voice booming with manufactured outrage. "They are based on nothing but illegally obtained, deceptively edited recordings, and the vindictive testimony of a disgruntled daughter and her new, predatory husband, who initiated this fraudulent marriage to seize control of the company. We will fight this, and we will win." They were painting me as the villain, the usurper. The next blow came an hour later. It was an automated alert from the company's financial servers. I still had my executive access. A high-value transfer had just been executed from an offshore holding account I never knew existed. $3.2 million. I looked at the transaction log. The recipient was unknown. The authorization code was Sloan's. My sister, the bright, shining social media darling, had looted the emergency fund and vanished. Her phone was disconnected. Her social media accounts went dark. She had taken her blood money and run, leaving me, Lucas, and the 43 families who depended on us to face the wreckage. The bank, citing the murder charges and the unstable ownership structure, froze our primary operating accounts. The harvest was half-picked, the trucks were scheduled, and I could not make payroll. The estate, which had survived 25 years of lies, was about to be killed by the truth. Then, the email started. Not from lawyers, not from banks, from farmers. An email from the Greaves family, our neighbors to the north. Heard you're in a jam. Our big mechanical harvester is free for the next 2 days. It's yours. Our crew will drive it. Another, from Macintosh Orchards. Don't let that fruit rot. Delaney, we're sending 2 crews and our mobile drying unit. Pay us when you can. The Valley, the community my parents had viewed with such cynical disdain. They were stepping in, not for the Brooks name, which was now toxic, but for the land, for the fruit, for the people. Their support was like a steel rod pressed against my spine. I called an all-hands meeting, everyone, the 43 Brookhaven employees, and the 20-odd workers on loan from the neighboring farms. We gathered in the main courtyard, the air crisp with the smell of apples. I stood on the back of a flatbed truck, my voice shaking but carrying in the cold air. I'm not going to lie to you, I began. The company accounts are frozen. The owners are fighting for their freedom, and there is no money to pay you, not this week. The silence was cold. I saw Rosa and her crew, their faces hard, worried. I cannot ask you to work for free, I said, but I am asking you to trust me. Lucas Hale and his family trust are guaranteeing the operating funds. As of this morning, I have been granted temporary operational authority. My first act is this. I am committing to full transparency. The books are open. Every cent this harvest earns will go to you first. Your back pay will be honored. Your health care will be secure. Your safety will be my primary concern, not profit. I paused, looking at them. My family built this company on a lie. I am asking you to help me rebuild it on the truth. Lucas stepped up beside me. My grandfather, Edmund Vale, was the man who died for that truth. We are restructuring, effective immediately. We are restoring his legacy. The new sign on the gate will read, Vale and Brookhaven. We are launching the bitters program he invented. We are going to honor the land, not poison it. Miguel, my foreman, stepped forward. He looked at me, his eyes searching. We have known you since you were a girl. Delaney, we have never known you to lie. We will work, not for them, for you. A murmur of assent. It was not a celebration. It was a contract, forged in the field. That night, Lucas and I were in the guest house, buried in spreadsheets, attempting the financial surgery required to save the company. The exhaustion was a physical weight. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the small house. I opened the door. Marjorie. She stood on the doorstep, immaculate. She wore a cream-colored cashmere suit and pearls. Her hair was perfect. She looked as if she had just returned from a board meeting, not a county jail. She was smiling, a warm, placid, terrifying smile. Delaney, darling, she said, her voice smooth as cream. I'm so glad I caught you. This has all been such a dreadful misunderstanding, a family spat, blown out of proportion. She glided past me into the room, her eyes landing on Lucas. Gregory is a complete wreck, of course, just devastated, but I told him, we are a family. We will fix this. In her hand, she was carrying a single, dust-covered bottle. My blood ran cold. I knew that bottle. It was a 1995 Heritage Reserve, our best, most priceless vintage. I thought, she said, placing the bottle gently on the coffee table, that we should talk. You and your husband. This has all been very theatrical, but it's time to be practical. We need to find an arrangement that benefits everyone. She was here to offer a deal, to buy our silence. Let us drink to new beginnings, she said, her smile never faltering. From her expensive leather handbag, she produced a corkscrew. My eyes were fixed on her hands. She centered the screw, and with one single, fluid motion, she pulled the cork. Shink. The sound was wrong. A cork from 1995 would be brittle, fragile. It would require care, a delicate touch. that sound. It was too smooth. The cork was new, or it had been reinserted. Lucas had seen it too. "Allow me," he said, his voice perfectly level. He stepped forward and took the bottle from her hand. "After all, Marjorie, you're our guest." He poured a small amount, maybe an ounce, into a single glass. "I'm a stickler for quality," Lucas said, swirling the dark garnet liquid. "Just like Delaney, an old vintage like this, you always have to check for sediment, for turning." Marjorie sat on the sofa, watching him. "It's a perfect bottle. Lucas, I chose it myself." "I'm sure you did," I said. I walked to the kitchen counter, where I kept my portable field testing kit. "I'll just check the pH. The acidity can fall off a cliff in a wine this old. It's the first sign of failure." It was a plausible professional lie. Marjorie's smile tightened, just a fraction. "Delaney, don't be so dramatic. It's fine." I ignored her. I took a basic toxicology test strip from my kit. We used them in the lab to test for any unauthorized cleaning solvents or alkaline residues in the tanks before a new batch. It was a simple reagent test. I dipped the strip into the wine in the glass. The tiny white square of paper was supposed to stay white. It turned a deep, instant, violent blue, a chemical, unnatural blue. I dropped the strip as if it had burned me. It landed on the coffee table, a bright blue stain on the dark wood. "What?" Lucas said, his voice suddenly ice. "Is that?" I couldn't breathe. That's a base," I whispered, my mind racing through chemical charts. "That's not wine. That's lye, or ammonia. It's a caustic. It's poison." Marjorie's smile vanished. The mask was gone. She stared at the blue strip, her eyes dead. She had just walked into our house and tried to poison us. Her own daughter. She was out on bail for one murder, and she had just calmly and deliberately attempted 2 more. I did not scream. I did not move. My hand, shaking, found my phone. I hit the first number on my recent call list. "Sheriff Morales?" I said, my voice a choked whisper. "This is Delaney Brooks. I'm at the guest house. You need to come back. Now. My mother is here." I looked at Marjorie, her face a mask of pale, cold fury. "She brought us a bottle of wine, and it's poisoned." There was no negotiation. There was no escape. Sheriff Morales, who had been parked less than 5 minutes from our gate, was at the door in 2. She saw the bottle. She saw the glass. She saw the bright blue, damning test strip. This time, the arrest was quiet. Marjorie said nothing. She had made her first, last, and only arrogant mistake. The district attorney, reportedly furious, added the new charges immediately: attempted murder of a state's witness, attempted murder in the 1st degree. The next morning, in court, a new judge presided, a man named Whitaker. He looked at my mother, his face a mask of thunder. "You were released on a bond of $4.5 million, he said, his voice shaking with rage. "And your first act, within hours of your release, was to attempt to murder the 2 primary witnesses against you, one of them being your own child." He struck his gavel. "Bail is revoked, for you and for your husband, who is now an unacceptable flight risk given your family's actions. All motions for mitigation are denied. You will both await your trial in a cell, where you are no longer a clear and present danger to this community." They were gone. The board was clear. I walked out of the courthouse, into the sunlight. Lucas was beside me. We drove back to the estate. The lab was clean, quiet. The banks, upon hearing of the new charges, had unfrozen the accounts, placing them under the control of the Hale Trust and my temporary authority. Lucas handed me a stack of papers, a document granting me full, temporary operational control of Brookhaven Estates. I picked up the pen. This was not a victory. This was the first day of a long, brutal financial war. I signed my name. The surgery had begun. The trial was not a trial. It was an autopsy. The Yamhill County courtroom was packed. Every seat, every inch of standing room, was filled with journalists, with neighbors, with the curious, and with the silent, watchful faces of my employees. My parents sat at the defense table, separated from each other by their team of expensive lawyers. They looked small, pale, and unreal under the harsh fluorescent lights, like bad copies of the titans who had ruled the valley. The prosecution built the case with the same methodical precision I had used in the cellar. They presented the matrix. The insurance addendum was introduced by a stony-faced executive from the underwriting firm, who testified the 13-day turnaround on a threefold increase was highly unusual. The faked maintenance log was shown to the jury, alongside the coroner's report detailing the catastrophic failure of the tractor's braking system. A handwriting expert, a woman with cold, clear eyes, testified for 2 hours. She showed, with magnified, side-by-side comparisons, how the signature of Alicia Mendez on the stock transfer was a clumsy, traceable forgery, bearing no resemblance to her known, verified signature. She then showed the jury the hospital admittance records, proving the notary was incapacitated, 3 days deep into a stroke, on the day she supposedly signed her name. The room was cold, but it became arctic on the 3rd day. The prosecution, the DA said, his voice flat, would like to play an audio recording, obtained legally via a witness, documenting the defendant's own account of the events of March 19, 1999. They had filtered the audio, cleaning it of the shed's background hiss. Lucas's digital recorder had missed nothing. The courtroom was utterly silent. We heard it all. We heard my father's weak, sniveling, "I did what was necessary." And then we heard my mother. Her voice, clear, cold, and perfect, filled the room. He just needed a push in the right direction. I told him a single, decisive action was required. I made it clear, and it worked. We have had 25 years of stability, 25 years of success, all built on that one necessary moment. A sound went through the courtroom, not a gasp. It was a low collective intake of breath, a physical recoil from the sheer, cold-blooded audacity of the confession. I looked at the jury. Their faces were masks of stone. My mother had just confessed, with pride, to ordering a man's murder. But the DA was not finished. He was prosecuting the second case, the attempted murder of the witnesses. He called the chief toxicologist from the Oregon State Police Independent Lab. "Can you tell the court what you found in this bottle of 1995 Heritage Reserve?" The toxicologist adjusted his glasses. The wine, what was left of it, was mixed with a highly concentrated, commercial-grade lye solution, caustic soda. A few ounces would be lethal. It would have, in no uncertain terms, destroyed the esophagus and stomach of anyone who drank it. This time, people did gasp. The jury looked at my mother. She was staring at her hands, her face blank. She had tried to murder her own daughter with drain cleaner, and she had done it with the same dispassionate efficiency as signing a check. The defense lawyers, who had fought for weeks to have the audio recording suppressed, had nothing left. They offered a weak, meandering closing argument about family pressure and business stress. The jury was out for exactly 4 hours. We all stood as they filed back in. I felt Lucas's hand, resting lightly on my back. I was not shaking. I was hollowed out, waiting for the final, procedural strike. The foreman read the verdict. On the charge of murder in the first degree, against the defendant Gregory Brooks. Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, against the defendant Marjorie Brooks. Guilty. On the charge of attempted murder of a state's witness, against the defendant Marjorie Brooks. Guilty. One by one, the hammer fell. Forgery, insurance fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering. At the sentencing a week later, Judge Whitaker looked at my parents. He seemed to look right through them. "You have not," he said, his voice shaking with a quiet, controlled rage, "shown 1 second of remorse. You have shown only anger at being caught. You took a man's life, his legacy, and his company, and you built your kingdom on his bones. You then, Mrs. Brooks, attempted to coldly murder your own child to preserve that kingdom. It is the most profound failure of humanity I have ever seen in this courtroom. He delivered the sentence. 30 years, no possibility of parole. The words echoed in the high-ceilinged room. 30 years. It was not a sentence. It was a burial. The final, heavy shovelful of earth on the coffin of their lies. The war was over, but the battles were just beginning. A financial crimes warrant was issued for Sloan. Her $3.2 million theft had made her a fugitive. She made her first mistake 2 weeks later, arrogant, foolish, and desperate for the attention she had lost. She posted a single photo on a new, private social media account, a picture of her, smiling, holding a drink on a beach. But in the corner, just visible, was the geotag of a luxury resort in a country with no extradition treaty. It was all the civil courts needed. Her assets, and the money she had stolen, were frozen, pending seizure. The civil case, brought by Lucas on behalf of the Vale Family Trust, was swift. The criminal conviction had rendered the old contracts void. The judge's ruling was surgical. 60% of Brookhaven Estates, the original, stolen share, was to be immediately restored to the Vale Family Trust. The remaining 40%, my father's share, was transferred to me, Delaney Brooks, but it came with a heavy binding condition, not jail time, but a different kind of sentence, a lifetime of community service. Using the asset itself, I was now the legal custodian, bound by the court to manage the company not for profit, but for the express benefit of its employees and the ecological health of the Yamhill Valley. I was not an owner, I was a steward, chained to the land, just as I had always been. That evening, I stood in the apple orchard as the sun went down. The air was cold, smelling of ripe fruit and the promise of frost. The victory in the courtroom felt distant, unreal. It did not bring Edmund Vale back. It did not erase 25 years of poison. I had spent my entire life trying to save a legacy, and I had succeeded, only to find out that the legacy I was saving was a balance sheet, a logo on a bottle, a lie. I finally understood. The real legacy was not the name on the gate. It was the 43 families who still had jobs. It was the soil, now breathing clean for the first time in 2 decades. It was the people. Lucas found me there, between the rows of trees. He did not say anything, just stood beside me. He was holding something in his hand. He held it out to me. It was a new bottle label, freshly printed. The design was simple, elegant, blending the old with the new. Vale and Brookhaven Botanical Bitters. And in the center, he had intertwined the 2 logos, the elegant V of Vale, looped perfectly through the traditional B of Brookhaven. It was not a merger, it was a promise, a way to preserve the past, and to build something new from the wreckage. I took it from him, my fingers tracing the letters. "My first act as custodian," I said, my voice quiet in the twilight, "is to sell the assets." He looked at me, surprised. "Not the land," I clarified. "Not the company, the poison, the main house, the luxury real estate, the penthouse in Portland, all of it. I'm liquidating the symbols of their greed." "And the money?" he asked. "It's not my money. It's his. It's Edmund Vale's." I looked at the label. "I'm starting a new foundation, the Vale Fund for Regenerative Agriculture. We'll use it to fund grants for farmers across the valley who want to transition to sustainable, chemical-free farming. We'll use the lie to finance the truth." The next week, I kept my promise to my workers. The 43 families who had stood by me, I used the new capital from the Hale Trust to establish an employee stock ownership plan. The company was no longer just mine, or just Lucas's. It was ours. The former workers were now minority shareholders, partners in their own future. And there was one last piece of business. We went to warehouse number 3. Lucas and I, we did not seal the trap door to the hidden cellar. We reinforced it. We built a new, safe staircase, and at the entrance, we placed a simple bronze plaque. "In memory of Edmund Vale, scientist, farmer, visionary, his work continues." The cellar was no longer a tomb, it was a memorial. The news that night called us a model for ethical revival in American agriculture. They praised the new Aesop. They praised the Veil Fund. They loved the story. But I knew, as I stood on the porch of the small guest house, which was now my only home, I knew this was not the end. The storm was over, but the horizon was dark with new clouds. Lucas came to stand beside me, looking out over the valley. "The criminal trial is over," he said. "But our competitors, the ones who benefited from my parents' chemical contracts, they won't let this go. The civil suits to break our new brand will be long. The brand war to paint us as frauds will be brutal. Are you ready for that? Are you ready for the long haul?" I looked away from him, toward the North Hill. It was just a dark shape against the stars, the place where all this had begun. A cold wind was blowing down from the ridge, rustling the leaves of the ripe apples, carrying with it the faint, sharp, clean scent of the earth, the scent of distilled botanicals from the open cellar door. I was born to finish this. Thank you for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. Remember to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this.